Eastside City First People's Hospital.
Emily stood outside the hospital room, her hand trembling as she held the critical condition notice, staring blankly at the doctors and nurses bustling through the corridor, her expression dazed. Everything she had just experienced felt like a nightmare. Just a few days ago, the Lynn Group, once a dominant force in Seaside City, had faced a major upheaval. Overnight, it was buried in debt, and the chairman, Henry, had fled overseas with funds, his whereabouts unknown. Emily and the longtime employees of the company watched helplessly as the building that represented the Lynn Group was rebranded with the Lou Group's sign. Everything had changed.
How could Jason do this to me? The man I loved deeply for 10 years.
The soft call brought Emily back to reality. The old butler, George, looked at her with pity. He had watched Emily grow up and knew she had always lived a life of luxury. But with the Lynn Group bankrupt, her father missing, and her mother critically ill with a heart condition, all these burdens now rested on her young shoulders.
Miss.
Uncle George, what's wrong? Is the hospital urging us to pay the fees? I'll go talk to them and see if they can give us a few more days. I'll find a way to solve the money problem.
Everything the Lynn family owned had been sealed by the court, and their bank accounts were frozen. How could she come up with the $200,000 needed for the medical expenses?
Unfortunately, I just built a house for my children back home and have no money left otherwise.
The hospitalization fee was already covered by you, Uncle George. Please don't say that.
She had experienced too much coldness from people in the past few days, and she was already very grateful that Uncle George had stayed with her.
But the $200,000 for the surgery.
I'll find a way.
Emily ran out of the hospital and only then noticed that it was snowing. Snowflakes, like willow catkins, drifted down from the sky, landing on her shoulders and hands. She tightened her wool coat and ran through the snow, tears streaming from her eyes. Emily stopped and wiped her eyes hard. She couldn't cry or fall, her mother's life was still in her hands. She returned to the building that had changed ownership and rushed inside. In her haste, Emily didn't notice the revolving door moving and hit her forehead hard against the glass. She felt dizzy and touched the back of her head, which had a bump and was even bleeding. But she couldn't care less. She rushed to the reception desk and shouted at the bewildered girl.
I need to see Jason, immediately.
The receptionist looked at Emily with difficulty. Although she looked disheveled and had a head injury, the face hidden under her messy hair was still delicate and beautiful, evoking sympathy. She knew Emily and was aware of her relationship with Jason.
The president said if Miss Lynn came looking for him, you could go to the 16th floor. He's waiting for you in the innermost office.
The girl finished and took out a comb and mirror from the desk, handing them to Emily.
Here, you might want to fix yourself up.
Emily didn't take the items the girl offered and walked straight to the elevator. Furious, she was ready to confront Jason. 16th floor, CEO's office. Jason sat with his back to the door, his well-tailored suit accentuating his tall and handsome figure. His long fingers adjusted the frameless glasses on his nose slightly. His features were as sculpted as a statue, his eyes cold as iron, yet his lips held a harmless, faint smile. The receptionist had called to say Emily was on her way up. Jason slowly turned his body around, quietly watching as the door was opened from the outside.
You're here.
Emily stopped in her tracks. The words she had prepared to question him with were silenced by his simple greeting. She opened her mouth but found herself speechless.
I need $200,000 for my mom's treatment.
Jason raised an eyebrow slightly, though his expression remained unchanged.
$200,000? Did I hear that right? You were the top socialite in Seaside City, and now you're asking me for money? Is the sun rising in the west today?
Emily remained silent, enduring Jason's sarcasm and ridicule. In her days of glory, $200,000 wasn't even enough for a month's worth of bags and shoes, and she never paid attention to luxury cars worth millions. Businessmen eager to curry favor with the Lin family would shower her with various luxury gifts. But now, she was seeking Jason for a mere $200,000.
Why should I?
Emily was stunned, only understanding his question when he repeated it.
The Lin family went bankrupt, and all the funds are frozen. As far as I know, you haven't even found a place to stay. I can lend you money, but how will you repay me? You have no right to ask me for money, no right to ask anyone for money.
But we're family. I've been married to you for 3 years. Can't you show some marital affection?
Marital affection? Feel your conscience and think about how you threw yourself at me and coerced me into marrying you. I wish I could tear you apart, and you want to talk about marital affection?
With that, he coldly curled his lips and pushed Emily away in disgust. Emily lost her balance and fell to the ground in a mess. Her thoughts drifted back to that rainy night 3 years ago. The Lin and Jason families were old friends, with close business ties. Emily had known she deeply liked Jason since she was 15, but she also knew he was engaged to Anna. So she kept her feelings hidden. 3 years ago, when she heard Jason was going to marry Anna, Emily couldn't suppress her sorrow and drowned her sorrows in bars every night. She saw that familiar black Range Rover parked outside the bar. Driven by impulse, she walked closer and looked inside the car. Just one glance, and she couldn't move her feet. Jason, drunk inside the car, looked more dangerous and alluring than usual. She stopped in a daze, not knowing what nerve she had hit, and opened the car door. She sat beside Jason. Jason grabbed her and kissed her passionately. Emily didn't resist. The alcohol made her lose her senses, and Jason's heat made her succumb. The next morning, she woke up in Jason's arms. Outside the car window, people were already busy. Emily placed her hand on Jason's warm chest, her pain reminding her of last night's madness. She marveled at how wonderful it all felt, like the best dream in the world.
Emily?
Jason opened his eyes, and for the first time, Emily saw confusion in his deep, ocean-like eyes. She couldn't help but think how handsome he looked even with a frown. But the next moment, Jason pushed her out of the car. The city's top socialite stood disheveled by the roadside, next to a Range Rover with a man inside whose face was dark with anger.
You think you can just walk away from this?
Henry didn't keep things under wraps, he even provided material for the media, making the incident widely known. Meanwhile, Anna, who was supposed to marry Jason, had disappeared. Henry went to the Lin family, using both threats and incentives, knowing their funds were tied up in a project. He offered $1 million in cash as a dowry. That day, Emily followed Henry to the Lin family and saw Jason, looking more somber than ever. He smiled, his voice cold.
You did all this just to marry me? Do you want to marry me?
Emily saw the hatred in Jason's eyes, but was too caught up in the joy of their impending marriage to notice. She nodded eagerly.
Yes, I want to marry you.
Jason's deep eyes darkened with a thin layer of frost, and he pulled a slight smile.
All right, as you wish.
Later, she wore the wedding dress she had meticulously designed, standing proudly and happily by Jason's side, basking in the guests' blessings. Immersed in happiness, Emily didn't notice the hatred and resentment in Jason's eyes. After the wedding, Jason was very cold to Emily. She naively believed that even a stone could be warmed up, diligently taking care of Jason's daily needs, cooking for him. But she didn't expect that 3 years later, Jason would personally destroy her father's lifelong efforts, taking over the building and even refusing to pay for her mother's life-saving treatment.
My father gave your family $1 million as a dowry. Now I only ask for 20,000. Is that too much?
Emily knelt on the ground, her hair disheveled, looking at Jason with none of her former elegance. Jason felt a moment of pity for Emily but quickly sneered and walked over to her, his long, cold fingers lifting her chin.
Do you know where Anna went?
Emily shook her head, staring blankly at Jason. Did this have anything to do with her?
No, I don't know.
Though she couldn't understand, her body instinctively shrank back, fearfully looking up at Jason, afraid of hearing terrible news from his mouth.
Anna is gone.
Jason's lips curled coldly, his eyes reddening as he looked at the stunned Emily.
When the city was flooded with news about us, when Henry demanded an explanation from the Lynn family, Anna disappeared.
Anna and Jason grew up together, childhood sweethearts. Since their engagement, she had always looked forward to marrying Jason and becoming his wife. Jason spoke, gently touching his chest. In his heart, he might never have loved Anna, but he cherished her like a sister. However, he didn't expect that after the scandal about him and Emily spread in the city, Anna would go to an apartment alone, get drunk, and deliberately leave the gas on. When he received the news and rushed to the apartment, Anna had already become a cold body, with her diary beside her. The diary mentioned that she couldn't be strong enough to watch another woman stand by Jason's side, nor could she call Emily her sister-in-law. Anna's family cried over her body, begging Jason to keep it a secret. He agreed, so it wasn't until 3 years later that Emily learned about Anna's death from Jason.
How could she? She shouldn't have. But this has nothing to do with me. I didn't do anything. You can't blame Anna's passing on me.
Ha! Mrs. Lynn's illness has nothing to do with me either. You can't blame it on me.
Yo!
Emily stood up, trembling with anger, barely believing what Jason had just said. She took deep breaths, trying to calm her rage.
She will be fine. Didn't you say you were forced to marry me? Then let's get a divorce. After the divorce, we can split the assets. 3 years of marital property, surely Mr. Jason has at least 200,000, right?
Jason wasn't surprised to hear the word divorce from Emily's mouth. He had already thought of a way to respond.
I won't divorce. Didn't you say you wanted to marry me? Then I'll let you have your wish. Besides, the Lynn family is heavily in debt now. Don't you think about paying back the creditors with the money?
He was pushing her to a dead end. The phone rang at this moment. It was Mr. Smith calling, saying that Mrs. Lynn's condition had worsened and she needed immediate surgery, asking if the money had been raised. Emily hung up the phone and looked at Jason again, having no choice but to show weakness.
I'm very sorry about Anna's passing, but you really can't blame it on me. I'm begging you, I'll even write an IOU. Can you lend me 200,000? I'll do anything.
Beg? The once high and mighty Emily had used such a humble word.
Do anything?
Jason raised an eyebrow, suddenly interested. His sharp, hawk-like eyes swept over Emily, examining her from head to toe. His gaze lingered on Emily's fair shoulders and neck, and he licked his lips playfully. Emily understood Jason's almost predatory look and knew what he wanted. For a moment, she thought about running away. But thinking of her mother, who was in critical condition in the hospital, Emily could only stand there as if being interrogated, taking off her tightly wrapped wool coat and scarf. If it were any other man, he would have pounced on her by now. But unfortunately, it was Jason. He merely glanced at Emily lightly and then looked away. He had to admit that even after 3 years of living together and seeing each other every day, he was still attracted to her.
Emily? Really? Are you this low, this shameless?
As long as Mr. Jason gives me 200,000.
Before she could continue, Jason took control of the situation, his eyes burning with intensity. Emily looked at Jason pitifully, like a wounded animal. She bit her lip, allowing him to manipulate her like a puppet, not resisting but also not responding. Jason let go of her and threw the wool coat that had fallen on the ground back at her.
I need money. If not cash, a check will do.
Jason laughed, his lips curling in a mocking smile as he looked at the disheveled and tear-streaked Emily. She hadn't even had time to dress properly before asking him for money.
What makes you think your body is worth $200,000 to me? You shamelessly opened my car door back then, and for 3 years, so many times. $200,000, you're overestimating yourself.
Emily was stunned, looking at Jason in disbelief. Was this the man she had loved for 10 years? Hearing from her father that the wedding date was set, she had stayed up countless nights, drawing one wedding dress design after another, sewing and rushing to finish, just to marry him beautifully. But that grand wedding that everyone in the coastal city envied turned out to be a complete joke, a conspiracy. Jason enjoyed the hatred in Emily's eyes, adjusting his collar slightly, and then changed his tone.
It's not impossible to get the money. Accompany me to Candy tonight to meet a client.
You want me to serve drinks?
Growing up in the coastal city, she knew what Candy Bar was, a place of debauchery, and she knew what serving drinks entailed.
What, don't you want money? Didn't you say you'd do anything?
Each of his words was like a sharp thorn, piercing deeply into Emily's heart. But she suddenly laughed, wiping away the dried tears on her face.
Sure, it's just a drink, right? As long as there's money. Can you guarantee he'll give me $200,000? Or will you give it on his behalf?
Michael, the third son of the Yee family in Leaf City, is known for spending lavishly on women. $200,000 is nothing to him.
Although she had never been to Leaf City, Emily had heard of Michael's reputation as a playboy.
But we haven't divorced yet. Is it appropriate for others to know?
Jason felt a dull pain in his chest, thinking of Anna lying cold in his arms, the lingering smell of gas in the room, and her diary.
Why wouldn't it be appropriate? You need money, and I happen to need to find a woman for Mr. Michael.
After a cold laugh, Emily turned to leave.
Wait. What are you going to do?
Of course, I'm going back to change into something decent and do my makeup and hair. Otherwise, looking like this, I might embarrass you, Mr. Jason.
She tightened the wool coat around her. Although she wasn't wearing anything underneath, it was wrapped tightly enough to hide the marks from their earlier intimacy.
You can't wait, can you?
Yes, after all, my mother is waiting for this money to save her life. I should thank you, Mr. Jason, for introducing me to such a good business.
Emily had completely given up on Jason and didn't care about the trivial matters around her. She just wanted her mother to be well and come out of the surgery safely. She forced a smile and turned to leave.
Slut.
Jason cursed, throwing the documents on his desk to the floor. Even though he had made those responsible for Anna's death pay, why didn't he feel any satisfaction? Emily tightened her coat and quickly headed for the elevator, trying to keep her head as low as possible, hoping no one would notice her. As she passed through the lobby, the receptionist was gossiping with someone.
Jason's wife just went upstairs. I wonder what they're talking about.
How would I know? But after what Jason did to the Lynn family, can they still be a couple?
If you ask me, they can't divorce. She still relies on Jason for her livelihood. If they divorce, how will she survive?
Emily sneered. She wanted to cut ties with Jason, but he refused. He blamed Anna's death on her and would never let her go. The gossiping girl noticed Emily walking towards her and quickly covered her mouth, guiltily looking away. Emily lowered her head, pulling the collar of her coat higher to cover the marks on her neck, and walked out of the building with large strides. She wasn't wearing anything underneath, and although the coat covered her, the cold wind and snow still found their way in. She gritted her teeth and got into a taxi, giving the address of her friend Sophia. After the villa was seized, she had nowhere to go, and it was her old college friend who took her in, inviting Emily to share her shabby rented apartment. When Emily returned to the apartment, Sophia wasn't there, but she called to say she had gone to the hospital and had brought $2,000 for Emily's mother. Although it was a drop in the bucket, it was all she could afford. Emily kept thanking Sophia on the phone. At this time, Sophia was the only one willing to help her.
You don't need to thank me. I'm more worried about how you'll come up with the rest of the money.
Sophia sighed lightly. The doctor had just come by to urge them to pay the upcoming surgery fees, saying the hospital wasn't a charity and if everyone asked for extensions, they wouldn't be able to operate.
Don't worry, there will be a way.
Emily reassured Sophia and comforted herself as well.
I confronted Jason. I've been blind for the past 10 years, liking him.
Emily said as she took out a white turtleneck sweater from the wardrobe, which could cover the kiss marks on her collarbone and neck, and wrapped her legs tightly in thick jeans. Sophia hung up the phone, hoping Emily wouldn't do anything foolish to raise the money. Emily didn't like wearing makeup, but to cover her haggard face, she applied a light layer. Narrator, tone, serious at candy bar. Before she even got close, she saw the Range Rover parked at the hotel entrance, hidden in the night. She wondered if she would have still gotten in the car without hesitation if time could go back 3 years.
Emily, it's been a while.
Jason stepped out of the car, his sharp eyes quickly locking onto Emily. She wore the same wool coat from the afternoon but had changed into a high-necked white sweater and dark jeans, looking both capable and mature. He knew she wore the high-necked sweater to cover the marks on her neck, but it still made him feel a burning discomfort, wanting to declare his ownership of Emily to the world.
Jason, can we talk?
Jason led Emily to the innermost private room and stopped outside the door.
What, afraid to go in?
I don't want to barge in. Could you, Mr. Jason, check my appearance? I wouldn't want to offend your guest, my benefactor, would I?
Emily smiled sweetly, but Jason had a momentary urge to strangle her. She ignored him, took a deep breath, and pushed the door open. Narrator, tone, cheerful inside. Michael was already surrounded by a group of hostesses in ultra-short shorts and crop tops, their white legs on full display, creating a very suggestive scene. Emily, almost bare-faced, stood out starkly among them.
Michael, a gift for you.
Emily bit her lip. He really did treat her as a gift to be given away, but she smiled brightly at Michael, moving closer to him.
I'm a gift from Mr. Jason. Would you like me to sing for you or play a game?
Though Emily wore light makeup, her noble aura was incomparable to the hostesses. Michael, overjoyed, pulled Emily into his arms, lifting her chin with his fingers.
Such a beautiful lady! What games do you know?
He gave Jason a thumbs up, thanking him for bringing such a stunning girl. The dim lighting in the private room made him oblivious to Jason's dark, stormy expression.
I don't know many games. Could you tell me the rules, Michael? And could you be a little gentle with me?
She curled up in Michael's arms, looking pitiful. Jason watched Emily flatter another man with a smile, and a sudden, inexplicable anger rose within him. He had made Emily accompany them to make her uncomfortable, not expecting her to adapt so well.
If you enjoy the game, could you lend me some money? My mother needs surgery for her heart condition.
Whether acting or genuine, a tear rolled down her cheek. Michael couldn't stand seeing a woman cry, especially when Emily, with her tear-streaked face, looked even more heart-wrenching. He wanted nothing more than to hold her and comfort her.
Michael, tone, hopeful money is just paper, right? As long as I'm happy, you can have as much as you need.
Emily's eyes lit up instantly, and she gave Michael a tight hug, overjoyed at securing the money for her mother's surgery. Michael was pleased with the embrace from the beauty and even kissed her on the cheek. Although Emily frowned, she gently pushed him away, remembering that Michael was her benefactor. However, this action looked more like a welcoming gesture to Jason, who was watching. Jason looked at Emily, seeing the faint smile on her face and her slightly parted, seductive red lips, resembling a cat that could easily captivate anyone. Michael's lecherous gaze roamed over Emily, and the kiss mark on her face was particularly glaring. Anger flared up in Jason's heart without warning. He even wanted to rush over, pull Emily out of the room, away from the bar, and lock her up somewhere, so she could only face him for the rest of her life, never to be touched by another man.
Jason, tone, angry she is mine.
Feeling Jason's gaze and thinking about the money for her mother's medical expenses, Emily managed to squeeze out a smile and nodded slightly at him. Jason didn't expect that this seemingly harmless smile would make him lose control completely. He rushed over, pulling Emily out of Michael's arms and quickly walking out of the room with her.
Michael, tone, shouting Jason, you bastard! You gave her to me, and now you're taking her back? If you can't bear to part with her, don't offer her up. Just keep her locked up in a golden cage.
Jason didn't even refute, and for a moment, he thought it wasn't a bad idea.
Emily, tone, sad Jason, let go of me, you're hurting me.
Emily struggled, but Jason dragged her into the adjacent room, where a few men and women were singing, looking bewildered at the sudden intrusion. Jason cursed under his breath, pulled out a wad of cash from his pocket, and threw it on the table.
Jason, tone, serious, I'm taking this room. You all go somewhere else.
Although they didn't know what was happening, they quickly took the money and left in a hurry. One sharp-eyed man recognized Jason and whispered to his companion.
Onlooker, tone. Whispering, isn't that Jason, the new tycoon of our coastal city? Is that his new girl? I couldn't see her face clearly, but her figure is amazing.
After they left, Emily was pinned against the wall by Jason. His presence was overwhelming, and Emily could barely breathe. Looking up at Jason, he sneered.
Jason, tone, angry, I never thought you'd be so good at seducing men.
As he spoke, he harshly wiped Emily's left cheek, where another man had kissed her. His strength was astonishing, and Emily's fair, delicate cheek turned red and swollen.
Emily, tone, serious, you told me to please Michael, and I did as you said. Michael agreed to give me money for my mother's treatment. You told me to entertain him, and that's what entertaining means.
She smiled, not realizing how harsh her words sounded.
Did I tell you to go to bed with him?
Then go ahead, after all, I'm just a gift you gave him. You don't care, so why should I?
Jason's veins bulged in anger as he pressed down on Emily, glaring at her with fury.
Emily, how can you be so despicable?
In the end, you asked me to come here, pretending to drink with him, but you really wanted to see me humiliated. Did my performance just now disappoint you?
The air in the room was stifling, and Emily was breathing heavily, her face flushed unnaturally, but she continued to speak stubbornly.
Disappointed or not, please remember our agreement. Not a penny less than 200,000.
Before she could finish her sentence, Jason forcefully kissed her, silencing her words. Emily struggled, pounding her fists against Jason's chest, cursing him in her heart. But her punches felt like they were hitting a sponge, only fueling Jason's desire to dominate her. He even threw Emily onto the sofa and pressed down on her. But somehow, Emily found the strength to push Jason away. Her eyes were red, and she cried as she accused Jason.
What do you want from me?
Divorce was not an option, serving the man he designated was not an option, explaining that Anna's death had nothing to do with her was not an option, and even begging him didn't work. She only needed 200,000 to save her mother's life, but Jason was pushing her to the brink. Jason didn't speak, just silently watched Emily. He had never seen her so out of control. In his memory, she was straightforward, always keeping the house tidy and cooking meals for him to come home to. But thinking about how she had caused Anna's death and forced him to marry her, he felt that Emily was scheming, and those meals became hard to swallow. Emily wiped the blood from her lips, bitten by Jason, and forced a bitter smile.
Now I have to go back to Michael. I hope he won't mind the interruption and will still be willing to give me the money to save a life.
But Jason held her hand tightly, not letting her go. He even pulled her closer, causing Emily to fall into his arms. He held her tightly, afraid she would escape his grasp. The feeling was very subtle. He hated Emily, but he couldn't let her go. Emily, trapped in Jason's arms, was breathing more and more heavily, feeling dizzy until she finally blacked out.
Noticing Emily's unusual state, Jason let go of her. She immediately collapsed to the ground, and when Jason tried to help her up again, he felt an inexplicable panic. He was afraid that Emily, lying on the ground, would become a cold, lifeless body in his arms, just like Anna.
Emily woke up in the hospital, with a friendly doctor in a white coat looking at her. Jason was also there, but he had turned his back to her. His head was lowered, and she couldn't see his expression, not knowing if he was happy or angry.
At least Jason had a conscience. He didn't leave me in the room but brought me to the hospital.
The doctor, who seemed to be in his 50s, glanced back at Jason. When he had carried Emily into the room, he was frantic, begging the doctor to save her. He thought Emily must be the woman Jason cherished deeply.
Young lady, you need to rest more. You're not the same as before. Now that you're expecting, you need to take extra care. Don't overwork or worry too much. At your age, what could be so troubling?
The doctor gently advised Emily, also mentioning some precautions during pregnancy. Emily stared at the doctor, still processing his earlier words.
I'm pregnant?
She had thought her missed period for over a month was due to the recent turmoil, Lynn's bankruptcy, her father's escape, dealing with creditors, and raising money for her mother's medical bills. She had overlooked it.
There's a small life growing inside, a child of mine and Jason's?
For the past 3 years, she had hoped countless times to have a child belonging to her and Jason, to tie his heart to hers. But this child came too late.
Jason probably doesn't want this child either.
The doctor, seeing Emily looking at Jason, tactfully left the room. Jason then turned around and slowly walked to Emily's side.
You're pregnant?
Probably, yes.
Emily looked up at Jason, his unclear eyes making her frown slightly, but she shook her head lightly.
Don't worry, I'll terminate the pregnancy. I won't use it to ask for anything. But can it wait a few days? I want to wait until after my mother's surgery.
Although Emily had never had a child, she knew basic physiology. After a termination, the body would be weak, and she couldn't handle the current chaos.
Of course, if you're worried, we can schedule the procedure together. But this is your child too, can you cover the medical expenses?
Jason didn't speak, but his gaze on Emily deepened.
No, keep it. I'll pay to clean up Robert's mess and cover Mrs. Lynn's medical bills.
Emily looked at Jason in a daze, thinking she had misheard.
Why? I'm the one who caused Anna's death. You hate me so much, would you want me to have your child?
She reminded herself that even if she kept the child, there was no future for her and Jason.
Having the child means you can't escape.
Emily didn't agree with Jason, she just watched him silently as he turned and left.
When you make up your mind, come to my office.
Emily smoothed her slightly messy hair. Despite her haggard appearance, her eyes were gentle, and her features delicate. She gently touched her still flat abdomen, wondering about the child growing there.
I can't have this child.
Jason got into his car, removed his tie, and rolled down the window irritably. His well-defined fingers gripped the steering wheel as he sped down the road to the villa. Halfway there, he received an overseas call. The caller ID showed it was Julia, Anna's twin sister, a rising star in the entertainment industry. Jason found a place to park and answered Julia's call.
Hello?
Jason, am I disturbing you?
No. Is there something you need?
Julia bit her lip lightly, her face turning red with shyness.
I heard about what happened in Seaside City. The downfall of the Lin family was your doing, right?
Yes. So, you called to talk about this?
Jason's voice was calm, without any emotional fluctuation. Julia continued nervously.
When my sister left, you swore you'd make everyone who hurt her pay. You've finally done it.
Yes, I did.
So, you'll divorce that woman, right? A woman like Emily doesn't deserve you. If it weren't for avenging my sister, you wouldn't have married her. You'll divorce her soon, right?
Julia, I did seek revenge on the Lin family, but I never planned to divorce Emily.
Julia was completely panicked.
You're not planning to divorce Emily?
She's pregnant.
Emily returned to the building that had changed ownership and rushed inside. In her haste, she didn't notice the revolving door moving and hit her forehead hard against the glass. She felt dizzy and touched the back of her head, which had a bump and was even bleeding. But she couldn't care less. She rushed to the reception desk.
I need to see Jason, immediately!
The receptionist looked at Emily with difficulty. Although she looked disheveled and had a head injury, the face hidden under her messy hair was still delicate and beautiful, evoking sympathy. She knew Emily and was aware of her relationship with Jason.
The president said if Miss Lin came looking for him, you could go to the 16th floor. He's waiting for you in the innermost office.
The girl finished and took out a comb and mirror from the desk, handing them to Emily.
Here, you might need these.
Emily didn't take the items the girl offered and walked straight to the elevator. Furious, she was ready to confront Jason. Emily knew better than anyone that approaching Jason was like walking into a lion's den. The only thing she could do now was to comply with his demands. She moved closer to Jason, reducing the distance between them.
You don't want to have a child for me?
No.
But didn't you insist on having a child for me back then, even asking me to name him?
Emily opened her mouth to retort but felt a deep sense of helplessness. Leaning against Jason's chest, listening to his harsh questioning, Emily smiled faintly. She moved slightly to escape Jason's firm grip, her smile cold and devoid of any emotion.
But you caused the downfall of the Lin family, and I was responsible for Anna's passing. Are we really suitable to have a child together?
Yes.
Emily stared at him, feeling her dead heart start to beat again. But Jason's next words pushed her back into the depths of despair.
Jason, did you ever love me?
Jason didn't answer immediately. Instead, he released Emily, stepped back, crossed his arms, and looked at her from head to toe. Emily felt her heart inexplicably race, her whole body tensing up as if she were bound and unable to move. She didn't even notice her shoulders hunching slightly.
No.
Emily wasn't disappointed, she suddenly felt relieved. Before she could speak, Jason asked first.
What about you? Did you ever love me?
Emily's body trembled slightly. Then she smiled brightly.
Of course I loved you, but now, I can't afford to.
Jason's expression changed.
As you said, I was responsible for Anna's death, and I don't blame you for the Lin family's downfall. We're even. I will have the child. We're still married, and if you insist on not divorcing, I'll have to wait until my mother recovers and then take it to court. You will have visitation rights, but the child will be mine.
I agree.
Soon, the medical expenses for her mother were covered, and Emily finally felt at ease and focused on her pregnancy. 9 months later, the baby was born, and Emily held the child, tears of joy streaming down her face. Jason also signed the divorce papers. Their first half of life was filled with mutual hatred, so it was best to end it with this child as both an end and a beginning, completely resolving the animosity between them.
The end.